So I was talking to a client just very recently, and they're in a marketing team, quite a large organization. And they asked me the question, how do you deal with the challenge between product and marketing? How do you deal with tensions between those teams? I thought it'd be useful to see if we could manage to formulate a response to that question, including both a marketing person, that's me, and a product person. And I've invited Jason along, Jason Knight, who is a fractional chief product officer with a lot of experience in product teams. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, Jason.
What have I been up to? So yeah, I mean, it's been a couple of years now as a kind of freelance and fractional type person. I wanted to go and see the world and not just work for one company at a time, and basically get involved in lots of things like a child. So it's definitely been an interesting kind of journey over the last couple of years. Worked with some interesting companies and got sort of tried to tackle some really interesting problems. Obviously, all companies, as I'm sure you know, you're kind of in the same game as well from the marketing side. Like all companies that bring in fractionals have some kind of capability gap, or maybe some kind of problem that they don't know how to solve. So you get to see kind of really exciting companies at stages where they're very much in need of transformation, or they kind of need a push in the right direction, and that's really what I like to do. Kind of get in, help to set things up, and then hire a full-time person to go and when everything is stable, they can go and do the operational work going forward. So yeah, I've kind of at some point I tried to coin this phrase of being like the Winston Wolf of product management, like the guy who turns up and cleans the blood out of the car and takes it off to the breaker's yard. But I realized very soon after that very few companies want to admit that they've got blood all over the inside of the car. So you need to have a slightly softer positioning. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Fair enough. So look, I've got a list of complaints about the product department. I'm sure
come at me, bro. Come at me.
I'm sure you've got a list of complaints about the marketing team, but I've got this kind of theory that one of the challenges is we struggle to understand the difference between the two teams because actually we're so similar. We kind of look the same and we talk the same language a lot of the time. But personality-wise, we're a lot of the time quite similar, sort of product and marketing teams. But there is a difference, and there's always a difference in what we're looking to achieve from that. So, what are the challenges you have with marketing teams as a product manager or a CPO?
I think actually, if I reflect on some of the companies that I've worked with, there are a couple of challenges that maybe aren't the kind of challenges that you're talking about, but I think that they're worth calling out. Mm-hmm. In some cases, it's when you turn up at a SaaS company, a product company, and they don't really have any product marketing capabilities at all. Like they'll have, say, sort of a brand marketer or some kind of awareness or SEO person or something like that, or someone that can put on events, but they don't have anyone that's really that close to the product at all. So I think that's a problem to solve. I mean, obviously that's a problem for you to solve, but like that's still a thing. Yeah, because you're talking about like the similarities in mindset, which I agree, and I think that the very best product managers should have a strong idea about marketing in their heads as well. But I don't think that's as close when you turn up to somewhere that doesn't have like product marketing. Like they have quite a different mindset. And I think the other problem that I see also is when they do have, or well, whether they do or not, but like even if they do have a product marketing person, very little relationship between the product management team and the product marketing team. Like I turned up at one place that had product marketing and had product management, and I had a kind of a joint meeting with the product marketing side and the product management side, and it was very clear that they'd barely ever spoken to each other before, and they've been there for months or years. And you sit there and think, well, how can these people not be talking to each other? I also level the same complaint, to be honest. I mean, I do a lot of work trying to help product managers make peace with sales teams as well. Like, I mean, that's probably like the most far apart relationship you can think of in many companies. And you sort of turn up at a company and it's the same deal with the sales teams and basically any commercial team. Product over here, commercial over here, never the twain shall meet, completely misaligned and not collaborating at all. And I think, to be honest, those are the problems that I see the most. If you're talking about problems caused by more well-functioning relationships, I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I'd probably imagine that the product managers cause more grief for the product marketing people than vice versa, because I've very often seen product marketing certainly where I've seen it as like it's almost a pull relationship. Like they're pulling, or they're trying desperately to pull stuff out of the product managers versus the product. If the product managers are talking to them at all, they're very much like giving them information when they ask for it, versus actually kind of collaborating with them and getting it to them in a timely fashion and involving them at the right stage of the equation as well. So I'm sure that there are things that product managers individually could, product marketers individually could be complained at about. But I think I see it as in a lot of companies, and a lot of the complaints I do see out there, it's a lot more about product marketing complaining about PMs than vice versa.
So on the one level, you're talking about marketeers not being close enough to the product. And on the other level, we're saying you haven't given us enough information about the product. We've asked you for blog content, we've asked you for help content, whatever it might be. And, you're not coming back with stuff that is suitable. These are the sort of complaints I think that we hear a lot. And then I guess the other side of it is really what we're looking to achieve from any piece of work, and in terms of what are the objectives, what are the strategic key objectives that you're working towards. And sometimes in a small business, where those objectives are worked out as a leadership team as a whole, which might have product and marketing on it, then people are aware of that. But in the larger the organization gets, that the harder it is sometimes to really align those objectives across the different teams, or even understand what the other one is looking to achieve. And I think that's one of the areas that causes a little bit of tension is unless people understand the objectives that you're looking to meet, then how do you know you're pulling in the right direction, I guess?
I think that's a really common problem, though, not just between, I mean, it obviously can be a problem between product teams and marketing teams, but I think also, to be honest, it's just generally a massive problem in many organizations, this kind of completely misalignment. Like, I've gone into companies and asked like the heads of each function, like what they think the strategy is. And if they give me an answer at all, it's generally different to what the other person says. Like, you could probably get more answers than people you actually speak to. So it's a general problem, but obviously when you've got a product marketing team that are there to obviously make sure that you can get your product to market, or product managers should absolutely care about that. I don't necessarily think enough of them do, either because they don't want to get involved in that side, or because they're being specifically kind of held off from doing that. But like, from my perspective, product managers kind of feels like a lot of times they feel like they're operating off in a bit of a silo, like, and they're very close, obviously, traditionally to the development team and to the design team. If you're lucky enough to have a good design team, I've certainly worked at places that didn't even have any designers, let alone product marketers. But like, if you're in a situation where they're kind of off at the side in this kind of product trio, almost with a wall around it, and kind of seeing the delivery of the software that they're putting out as almost like the one metric that matters for them. As I know, you as a product manager, you should be talking to the marketing team, maybe not as much as, but certainly a lot more than you are. Like, not as much as the developers, I mean, because you've got to get the stuff built, but like, you should care about how you get this to market. You should care that you have a unified view of ideal customer profiles, and you should care. And actually, maybe this is one thing that maybe something a little bit that I could ding product marketers for, depending on the kind of maturity of their product marketing. Like, you should have a structured release process and types of release process for types of features that you're going to put out. Like, is this a big splash, or is this something we'd do an event about, or is this something that we'll just write a blog post about, or is this something that's just something that goes in the release notes or that we handle individually with customers, or is this something that we actually don't want to say anything about at all because actually it's embarrassing that we couldn't do it already? Like, having some kind of structured go-to-market for features and capabilities, I think, is something that isn't always there, obviously, which I would put on the product marketing side. But whatever happens, I think if you've got product marketing and product management teams not aligned on some of the fundamentals, then it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. So how do we fix it? I mean, fairly straightforward, I guess, right?
Just get them all aligned and on the same page. No, I mean, look, I think, and again, I take some lessons from I run a course with a friend of mine on product managers and sales. Again, very different relationship, and something that does still suffer in some cases from similar symptoms, like, sort of misalignment on who you should be going after, what the value prop is, all of those things.
Mhm.
And, frankly, my first bit of advice is always just go and have a coffee with them. Like, don't even like there's a lot that you more than that you need to do. But like, I think that the worst companies, or the companies with the worst relationships and the worst kind of the most dysfunction, it's always been where they're just like, it's almost like these people just aren't talking to each other,
Yeah.
or they're only talking to each other when there's an escalation or some last minute rush or something like that. And of course, there are going to be escalations and last minute rushes. Like, that's going to happen in any company, especially in startups as well, when you're sort of sitting there and everything's an emergency, right? But just meet these people on a human level. Start to understand what they're being asked to do. Tell them what you're being asked to do. Maybe you'll find out that you're both being asked to do different things, and that's a problem to be solved.
Mhm.
Start to understand like what they think success looks like, and how they want to collaborate with you, and what they think is missing, and what their frustrations are of you. And like, obviously, that does require a certain level of psychological safety, I guess. Like, there's certainly some companies where everyone just sort of seems to retrench and not want to talk to each other about that kind of thing. So, obviously adapt that to the level of such that you have in your company. But just talk to these people as people and start to understand what's on their minds, and vice versa. I think it sounds really fluffy and like, well, where's the ROI on that? But like, you can't start to do all of the other things if you're in different camps. So just talk to these people, find out what's going on.
Yeah, and I think I think it's really interesting when you talk about those sort of organizations that don't necessarily have a culture that engenders that and pushes that forward. We're grown-ups here, right? This is actually in our control. The overall business culture might not be in our control quite so much, but we can still sit down and have a cup of coffee. We can still do that.
100%.
We can take the initiative and work with these people on that and work together on that sort of stuff.
A hundred percent.
And it's interesting. You mentioned the idea of a sort of a unified understanding of an ICP, so the ideal customer profile piece, and I think that's really important. I'm not sure that's something that is really shared between departments a lot of the time in organizations, right?
I'm not sure all organ. I'm not sure all organizations have an ICP,
No.
like, at all. Like, I mean, and again, this is something that I talk about a lot in the sales thing as well. Like, when the sales team, who themselves probably see the marketing team as just there to write decks for them to go and present to people, like, they like, I'm pretty sure that marketing people, the majority of marketing people, would love to have a nice sort of defined ICP that they could go after and, build materials for, create positioning for, do all of that good product marketing stuff to make sure that they actually, have the biggest impact and make the biggest splash in there. And obviously, from a product management perspective, we love that too, because we're sitting there saying, well, look, rather than just having this random distribution of just whoever we could get a call with, we've actually got a sort of purposefully set up group of people that are our absolutely best customers that we're going to optimize for and build for, and all those things. Like, it just makes everything easier. Doesn't mean that, obviously everything should be easy, but like, you want to reduce as much friction as possible. But at the very least, if you do have one, I think the product management and the product marketing team and the marketing team in general should absolutely be aligned on that. Like, I don't want to see an ICP over here and a different ICP over there. And I've definitely seen that as well. Like, where you
Yeah.
have two people sitting there saying, "Oh, well, these are the people we want to talk to." And so, well, what about those people that the marketing team are writing all of the, the collateral for, and targeting, and kind of all their positioning and decks and all that stuff? Like, it beggars belief that you'd be talking, that you have two different people basically walking in different directions and expecting there to be a good result out the back of it. Again, I'm sure there's lots of debate to be had over, who those customers actually are, and like what needs you really serve for them and all of that stuff. Like, fine, let's have those debates, but let's have them before we start then walking in those different directions.
Yeah. And to be clear, right, sometimes that misalignment does come from the top, right? Because somebody
Oh
in
yeah,
product has
100%.
been told, the CEO said, actually, I think we need to start moving into the banks, or we need to start
Yeah,
moving into this sector here. And they've told product that, they've not told anybody else that. There's no point in telling
yeah.
marketing because we've not got a product yet, right? And
Ha.
but actually, if you have got that ongoing conversation between product and marketing, and you have got product saying, "Oh, look, boss wants us to start talking about banks now," then you're starting to talk in the same language and starting to
Yeah.
to work to the same objectives, right?
Again, I still think that it's a fundamental part of any product manager's job, unless potentially they're working on some sort of really deep internal platform product or something like that, which, still needs evangelizing around
Yeah,
the
yeah,
company, but, maybe it doesn't have the same kind of outward facing stuff going on. But like anyone that's working on something that goes into customers' hands, I think it's fundamentally important that they spend a lot more time thinking about the actual go-to-market of their product than in many cases they do. And yeah, to be honest, this may be more of a B2B disease than a B2C disease, because obviously if you're B2C, then you've probably got more of a direct line to your customers, and you know, they're probably, you know, because you've not got salespeople in the way, right? Like you kind of live or die by how easy it is to get onto your platform and get the moment of delight and stuff like that. Whereas with B2B or B2B2C organizations, or you know, heaven forbid, like B2G or something like that, you're in a situation where it's a lot hard. You know, it's almost a lot harder for product managers to draw like a line from their specific efforts to, for example, revenue or growth or share or anything like that, because yeah, it's just part of a package that they're selling to people, and it's the same price for everything. Like you can't sit there and say, well, if I build this feature, then you know, whether people use it or not, like if it's bundled in, like the money's the money, right? And it can kind of lead PMs, B2B PMs, to feel a little bit disconnected, I guess, from the commercial outcomes. And obviously some PMs, maybe some more purist thinkers, will be like, well, no, ew, like commercial outcomes, that's not what we worry about. We worry about the users or the customers. Which is obviously itself its own little dichotomy there. But I think it's fundamental that all product managers should think not just care about like where the ideas come from. They should care about that. Not just care how the stuff gets built. Sure, they should care about that, but also care about how it gets into people's hands. Now, if they can find a way to do that through the product without marketing and without sales, good luck to them. I mean, yeah, you get more towards your kind of product-led growth in those situations, but even that still requires marketing, right? But
Yeah.
like, you can't complain about the sales team, for example, if you can't come up with a different way to get that product into people's hands. Like you're going to have to find a way to work with them. And it's the same, obviously, with marketing and any commercial team, customer success. Like you need to find a way to work with them on the things that are important versus kind of retrenching or having different opinions or just going off in a different direction and hoping somehow that you can draw a line between the two when you finally get to some point where you need to collaborate again. It's like I genuinely and often recommend that product teams need to get much more comfortable, not just collaborating with their external, like with the users and the customers, critically important that they do that, but also to start turning some of that energy on their internal stakeholders as well, to make sure that we're pulling in the right direction.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And actually, I have seen it in the consumer world as well, the B2C world as well as the B2B world, and it depends on the sort of the type of the product that you're looking for. But I have seen exactly the same problems in the B2C world. You haven't necessarily got a problem with the sales team in that sense, but you do still have a challenge with sort of the way that you're going to go to market. You know, some of the stuff might be around pricing models and things like that, and you know.
Yep.
A product team is sometimes in that situation challenged to see if this approach works, whereas the marketing team have got a revenue target here, and
Yep.
that's, you know, that can cause you a real challenge for, as well, particularly if you're not talking, and that's really what it comes
100%.
down to, I think, right?
Got to
Do
talk.
you
Got to
go,
keep talking.
do you go so far as to involving somebody from the marketing team on your sort of regular product meetings?
I mean, I certainly have in the past. I mean, it very much depends on like what's going on, right? So, for example, if we're building some massive new use case, like some entirely new step change functionality that is, you know, like kind of permeates the whole thing, and this is going to be the sort of thing that maybe you want an event based off the back of it, or you know, some huge splash, or you know, you're going to be sponsoring the Super Bowl or something like that. Like, I think you could argue that getting the product marketing team involved more closely on a kind of a day-to-day, week-to-week basis on something that would traditionally be more reserved for kind of developers and designers. I think, yeah, they're perfectly valid and valuable members of the cross-functional team in those sorts of situations. I'd say if you're doing kind of incremental improvements and stuff and just kind of turning the handle, which many PMs are, thankfully, then you know they'd probably, the product marketing team could probably be spending their time a little bit better. But I still think that like a lot of this all just boils down to like whatever you do with the kind of cross-functional week to week, whatever cadence you have with the actual product team. Yeah, I also, by the way, know a lot of product management teams that don't seem to spend that much time talking to each other either, all just working off on their own little bits. But just getting those touch points regularly anyway, like once every couple of weeks, just get together with your head of product marketing or whoever you're working with on your part of the product, and just have a half hour with them. Bring up what's going on. What have they seen in their world? What have you seen in your world? And if there's any disconnects, you can kind of identify them quickly. Like, again, if you're only speaking to the marketing team once every 6 months or something like that, or only having proper conversations with them once every 6 months, then you're going to walk into the hedge again, right? Like, what's the point of that? So if you can have regular, like not too regular, you don't want to be like so in their pockets that you start getting fed up and having meaningless meetings. And that's something that developers complain about a lot, for example,
Yeah,
like with product managers, like, oh God, another stand up. Like, okay, look, you've got to optimize for, you want to make sure that the meeting isn't so infrequent that it's pointless, but also not so frequent that it's annoying. Like, maybe experiment with it a little bit. Like, what cadence works? Who needs to be there? What do we want to talk about? How long do we want the meeting to be? Like, you should always challenge standing meetings. You should never just sit there and just keep doing them for the sake of it. But I strongly believe that there's a case to say, well, look, how often do we have to meet to make sure that we're on track? And when does it slip? And that's the cusp that you want to be on.
I absolutely agree. So this is all just proof that we're not that different, right? Marketing and product. We agree
Yeah,
on
we're
this.
both weird. We're all weird. But it's
I think
difficult, right? Because like we're sitting there, and I know that you said earlier that marketing teams often have a bone to pick with the sales team and the kind of the sort of quarterly revenue targets that they put under. Product managers don't tend to have quarterly revenue targets, but they're still generally at loggerheads, at least with the sales team and often with the marketing team as well. And like you just sort of sit there and think, well, but it is hard because we're sitting there not with these targets, certainly from the product side, not with these targets in our head as such, not certainly in those terms. We're not the ones that get fired if we don't sell the product. We're not the ones that have to hit our quarterly revenue targets, otherwise we're out or we don't get paid as much. So I have a lot of sympathy for the kind of the more short-term motivated, more like the people that have got targets on their back.
Yep.
And I genuinely believe that product people would act very similarly to salespeople in that sort of situation. If you told me as a product manager that you're going to get fired if you don't bring in X amount of revenue in this quarter, I'd probably make a lot worse sort of long-term decisions because I would want to make sure whatever happens, I hit the quarter. Same, but it is hard to try and balance this need for sort of short-term cash injections and continual kind of revenue growth and obviously all of the things that you have to do for that. And this kind of general philosophical idea, which I think is shared by marketing and certainly by product, and hopefully in most cases by leadership as well, of building a long-term thing that's going to last. I think a lot of the stresses and strains that happen between all of these teams are caused by the fact that whatever happens and however grand people speak, they're still in this situation where they're being dragged over for the next quarter. And if they don't hit those numbers, then you get to kind of a last minute panic. And I know that there have to be goals and targets to drive certain things and performance and give investors their payback and stuff. But I think that there needs to be a really careful balance. Something that is also then agreed between marketing and sales and product. Like, how much are you going to be investing in those incremental short-term gains, and like how much are you going to put into that, and how much are you going to put into making the big swings that are probably going to have a much bigger impact if you only get a chance to do on them. I've seen too many companies plodding along, doing those incremental things, going deal by deal, and never doing the big things. And then eventually they flatten out. The growth doesn't go anywhere anymore. They start complaining a lot more. But like it always just feels so avoidable if everyone just kind of can just have an adult. You said it earlier, like have an adult conversation about like what really matters to the company.
But it's about having that early as well, right?
100%. Yeah, it's much easier to stir the cement before it's set, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But if you start that quarter or that half or that project, and marketing is saying, I've got a really serious revenue gap and we need to fill it, and this is how we think we're going to go about that. And we need to do this because our investors need it and our shareholders need it, or the business needs it to keep going. Then product understands that, right? And if you start that from the very beginning of that conversation, and then you can constantly remind people, and we will drip that in on a regular basis, but at least you're starting off from the right place, right?
100%. Like, again, there's so many analogies you can use, that the walking across the field or cement before it's dried or all of those things. But like ultimately it goes back to that whole point about having a coffee, right? Like whether or not you actually want to have a coffee, but like having conversations and understanding that like there's this whole thing that tends to happen, especially when times are tough. when you sort of sit there and you're like, oh God, everyone just hates each other now. Like everyone's shouting at each other, no one's talking to each other, no one's collaborating with each other properly. They're all just almost like looking after themselves and battening down the hatches and just trying to get through it. And it's like, okay, look, I get that. But if we can just have grown-up conversations where, you know, Bob from marketing doesn't get you know, offended because you've said that something might be important or not, or that, you know, the CEO doesn't throw their toys out the pram because you've, you know, maybe introduced a little bit of doubt into an initiative that the CEO thinks is really important, but you know, maybe know a couple more things about the product than the CEO. So, you know, you at least want to check those things out, but then you kind of get dragged over the coals. Like, I understand, like business is hard, right? Of course it's hard. And sometimes tempers fray, and sometimes, you know, people react poorly to things. But ultimately, I think that the very best companies, and it goes back to that kind of psychological safety, like you should be able to have these discussions. You should be able to have them as soon as possible, not be judged for saying something. You should be able to just like accept that we're all trying to get a good result. So let's just accept that most people aren't trying to crater the company, and then just try and work within those boundaries and talk to these people and try and find out how you can make each other successful.
Absolutely agree. Jason, what a pleasure to discover that we're not so different.
Yeah, I'm going to go and get my Product Marketing Alliance certificate now, just to jump to the dark side.
Stuff. So the long and the short of it is, start that conversation early, keep those conversations going, and, you know, be human about it, right?
100%. Like even in the age of AI, people are still the driving force behind the majority of the decision making in the company. So let's embrace that and just try and make sure that we're enabling good decisions.
Thank you so much for joining us today. That's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you very much.